I never imagined the daughter I taught to ride a bicycle in our backyard would one day shove me down my own stairs and tell me I deserved every bruise. She stood over me at the bottom of those steps, screaming that I was a pathetic, worthless old man who cared more about his money than his own flesh and blood. What my daughter didn't know was that the broken old retiree she saw lying on that cold floor was sitting on a fortune she couldn't even dream of, and I was about to use every penny of it to teach her the most painful lesson of her life. My name is George Whitfield. I'm 66 years old, and I live alone in a modest ranch-style house in a quiet neighborhood outside of Columbus, Ohio. My wife, Diane, passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2007. Our daughter, Megan, was 14 at the time. I held Diane's hand in that hospital room and made her one promise. I told her I would make sure our girl grew up strong, independent, and kind. I have spent every day since wondering where I went wrong. After Diane died, I worked as a maintenance supervisor at a packaging plant. The pay was decent, nothing spectacular, but I stretched every dollar like it was made of rubber. I skipped meals so Megan could have new school clothes. I drove a rusty 2001 Ford Ranger for 15 years so she could have a reliable car for college. I cashed out my vacation days every single year and put the money straight into her tuition fund. Megan graduated from Ohio State in 2015 with a degree in marketing. She landed a job at an advertising firm in Columbus making good money, and I thought my promise to Diane had been fulfilled. My daughter was educated, employed, and on her way. But somewhere between graduation and now, the girl I raised disappeared. In her place stood a woman I barely recognized. It started on a Saturday afternoon in early February. Megan showed up at my house with her boyfriend, Travis Holloway, a 4-year-old real estate agent she had been dating for about 7 months. Travis had the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. He shook my hand too hard and called me sir, in a way that sounded rehearsed. They sat down in my living room, and Megan wasted no time. She told me they were engaged. Travis had proposed the previous weekend, and they wanted a June wedding. I was genuinely happy for her. I got up, hugged them both, told them Diane would have been over the moon. Then Megan pulled out her phone and showed me a spreadsheet. The venue, a converted barn estate, about 40 minutes outside the city, was $12,000 for the rental alone. Catering for 200 guests would run another $9,000. Photographer, florist, DJ, wedding planner, dress, tuxedo rentals, invitations. The list kept going. At the bottom of that spreadsheet was a number that made my chest tighten. San Wen Wu Ten Mei Yuan. Dad, we need you to cover the bulk of this, Megan said, as casually as if she were asking me to pass the salt. Travis and I can handle about $5,000 between us, but we need $30,000 from you. $30,000. I let the number hang in the air for a moment. Then I made the decision that would set everything in motion. I decided to test my daughter's character. Sweetheart, I said carefully, you know I'm living on my pension and Social Security. Between the mortgage, my medications, and utilities, I barely have enough to keep the lights on. I don't have that kind of money. The truth was very different. When Diane passed, her life insurance policy paid out $180,000. I never touched a cent of it. I invested it conservatively through a brokerage account that Megan knew nothing about. After 18 years of modest growth, that account held just over $260,000. I had always planned to give it to Megan eventually, perhaps as a down payment on a house or a nest egg for her children, but I needed to know who she really was before I handed over $250,000. Megan's reaction was immediate. Her face went red, and she set her phone down on the coffee table with a sharp click. Dad, you worked for 30 years. You own this house. You must have savings. Travis leaned forward. Mr. Whitfield, with all due respect, Megan has told me about the sacrifices you made for her education. We admire that, but this wedding is the next chapter of her life, and we were hoping you'd want to be part of it. The phrasing was smooth. Too smooth. It sounded like something they had practiced in the car on the way over. I told them I could try to scrape together $5,000 over the next few months, maybe $7,000 if I cut back on my prescriptions and skipped a few grocery trips. Megan exploded. She stood up from the couch and told me that other fathers take out second mortgages, sell their cars, liquidate their retirement accounts. She said her friend Caitlin's dad had spent $40,000 without blinking. She asked me what kind of father puts his own comfort above his daughter's happiness. Travis placed his hand on Megan's shoulder, but he didn't calm her down. Instead, he added fuel. He told me that in most families, the bride's father covers the wedding. He said it was tradition, and that refusing to honor that tradition would embarrass Megan in front of his entire family. His parents, he said, had already committed $8,000 for the rehearsal dinner and honeymoon contribution. What would they think when they found out the bride's father couldn't match even half of that? I asked them to leave. Megan grabbed her coat, and on her way out she turned to me and said something that cut deeper than any knife. She said Diane would be ashamed of the man I had become. I sat alone in my living room for a long time after they left. I looked at the framed photo of Diane on the mantel and whispered to her that I was sorry, but I needed to see this through. Over the next 3 weeks, Megan called me almost every day. Each conversation was worse than the last. She sent me links to father of the bride speeches and tagged me in social media posts about parents who showed up for their kids. Travis started texting me directly, sending screenshots of venue availability warnings and telling me that deposits were non-refundable. The psychological pressure was relentless. Then one evening, Megan called and told me something that shifted everything. She said, Travis's mother, Janet Holloway, wanted to meet me for lunch to discuss the wedding finances. I agreed, hoping a reasonable outside voice might defuse the situation. The lunch was a disaster. Janet was a sharp-tongued woman in her early 60s who spent the entire meal making passive-aggressive comments about how her family had always prioritized generosity. She told me that when her older son Bradley got married, she and her husband had contributed $25,000 without being asked. She looked me straight in the eye and said she hoped I wasn't the kind of man who let pride get in the way of his daughter's future. I maintained my act. I told Janet I was doing my best on a fixed income. She smiled thinly and said she understood, but that Travis had confided in her that Megan cried every night because she felt her own father didn't care. That was a lie. I knew it was a lie, because I had spoken to Megan that very morning, and she had been coldly furious, not tearful. The Holloways were building a narrative. They were framing me as the negligent father so that any resistance I showed would look like selfishness. 2 days after that lunch, something happened that changed the entire trajectory of this story. My neighbor, an 80-year-old retired schoolteacher named Dorothy Chen, knocked on my door in the middle of the afternoon. She was trembling. She told me that her furnace had died overnight, and the repair company was demanding $2,800 up front before they would even look at it. Her Social Security check wasn't due for another 12 days, and she had no family nearby. She was sleeping in her coat and heating water on the stove to stay warm. I drove Dorothy to the repair company that afternoon and paid the $2,800 out of my personal checking account, not the investment account. I told her it was a gift and that she didn't owe me anything. She cried and told me I was the kindest man she had ever known. 4 days later, Megan and Travis showed up at my house unannounced. But they weren't alone. Travis's younger sister, Ashley Holloway, was with them. Ashley was 28 and worked as a teller at the same credit union where I had my checking account. "Dad," Travis said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Ashley noticed something interesting on your account activity this week." My stomach dropped. They had accessed my financial records. Ashley pulled out a printed transaction summary. It showed the $2,800 withdrawal. "Mr. Whitfield," she said in a tone that was half professional and half accusatory, "you told Megan and Travis that you couldn't afford to help with the wedding, but 4 days ago you withdrew nearly $3,000 in a single transaction. Can you explain that?" "I can explain that it's none of your business," I said. "And I can also explain that what you just did is a federal crime. Accessing a customer's account information for personal use violates every banking regulation in existence." Ashley went pale, but Travis stepped in front of her. "Don't threaten my sister," he said. "We're just trying to understand why you have money for strangers, but not for your own daughter." Megan's voice came from behind him, low and shaking with fury. "Who did you give that money to, Dad?" I could have lied. I could have said it was for a medical bill or a car repair, but I was tired of performing weakness. I told them the truth. I told them I gave it to Dorothy because her furnace broke, and she was an elderly woman living alone in a freezing house. The room went silent. Then Megan laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was bitter, ugly, disbelieving. She said I had just proven that I cared more about a random old neighbor than my own daughter. She said the $2,800 I threw away on Dorothy could have covered the florist and the invitations. Travis told me I had 48 hours to commit to the $30,000, or they would publicly announce that the wedding was canceled because the bride's father refused to contribute. He said Janet would make sure every family, friend, and church member in Columbus knew the reason. Then Megan stepped toward me. She was standing at the top of the 3 steps that led down from my kitchen to the living room. I was on the bottom step, turning to face her, when she placed both hands on my chest and shoved me backward with a force I never expected from her. I lost my balance and fell hard onto the living room floor. My right hip hit the hardwood first, then my shoulder, then the back of my head. Pain shot through my entire body like electricity. Megan stood at the top of those steps and looked down at me with an expression I will carry to my grave. There was no horror, no regret, just contempt. She said maybe, if I spent a few days hurting, I would remember what it felt like to watch my daughter suffer because I was too cheap to help her. Travis pulled her toward the door. They left without checking if I was conscious. I lay on that floor for almost 20 minutes before I could move. When I finally dragged myself to the bathroom mirror, I saw a bruise already forming on my temple and blood on the back of my scalp where it had split against the floor. Dorothy found me the next morning when she came to bring me a thank you casserole. She called 911 immediately. At the hospital, the doctor told me I had a hairline fracture in my right hip, a mild concussion, and deep tissue bruising across my shoulder and back. When she asked me what happened, I told her I fell down my stairs. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. But she didn't push, and I needed time to think. That afternoon, lying in that hospital bed, I made a phone call that would change everything. I called my old college roommate, Dennis Archer, who had become a criminal defense attorney and later transitioned into prosecuting domestic violence cases for the county. I told him everything, every demand, every threat, every manipulation, and what Megan had done on those stairs. Dennis arrived at the hospital that evening with a legal pad, a digital recorder, and the calm, methodical energy of a man who had spent 30 years building cases. He listened to my entire story without interrupting. When I finished, he looked at me and said 4 words. "We are going to document everything." Over the next 2 weeks, I followed Dennis's instructions precisely. I installed 3 small cameras in my home, all legal under Ohio's one-party consent recording laws. I kept a detailed journal of every phone call and text message, and I waited. Megan came to the hospital once, the day before I was discharged. She brought flowers and a card, performing concern for the nurses. When we were alone, she dropped the act. She told me the venue needed confirmation by March 15th, and that my little tumble down the stairs shouldn't change anything about our arrangement. I asked her if she was really going to pretend she didn't push me. She looked me dead in the eye and said I had tripped because I was old and clumsy, and that if I told anyone otherwise, she would tell them I was going senile. Every word was captured by the recorder Dennis had given me. Back at home, I resumed my role as the struggling, intimidated father. Megan and Travis visited twice more, each time increasing the pressure. Travis cornered me in my own kitchen and told me that men who don't provide for their families end up dying alone in nursing homes with no one to visit them. Megan told me she had already ordered her dress and that the $4,500 charge was on a credit card she expected me to pay off. Meanwhile, Dennis was building the case. He hired a licensed private investigator named Sandra Voss, a former FBI field agent who now worked domestic cases. Sandra's findings were devastating. Travis Holloway was not the successful real estate agent he claimed to be. His license had been suspended 6 months earlier for falsifying property disclosures. He was currently unemployed and living off Megan's income and cash advances from 4 different credit cards, all maxed out. Total debt between them was over $48,000. But that wasn't the worst of it. Sandra discovered that Travis had been running a home renovation scam targeting elderly homeowners. He would approach seniors in neighborhoods near Columbus, offer discounted renovation work, collect deposits of $5,000 to $15,000, and never complete the work. Sandra identified 11 victims over the past 2 years. The total amount stolen exceeded $95,000. When Dennis told me, I felt something collapse inside my chest. My daughter had not only attacked me physically, she had attached herself to a predator who made his living stealing from people my age. And the wedding money they were demanding from me was almost certainly going to disappear into the same black hole of debt and fraud that had consumed everything else. Sandra also discovered that Ashley Holloway, the credit union teller who had illegally accessed my account, had done the same thing to at least 8 other customers, all of them elderly, all of them flagged by Travis as potential targets. The credit union's internal compliance department had already opened an investigation. Dennis laid out the full strategy on a Tuesday evening at my kitchen table. We would invite Megan and Travis to my house for a final conversation about the wedding money. During that meeting, we would systematically reveal everything we knew. The cameras would record it all. Sandra would be monitoring from Dorothy's house next door, and the following morning, Dennis would file criminal charges for assault, elder abuse, financial exploitation, and conspiracy. March 15th arrived. Megan and Travis walked into my house at 6 in the evening, confident and impatient. Travis was already talking about wire transfer logistics before he even sat down. I let them settle in. Then I told them I had the money, but that the bank required documentation of the wedding expenses before releasing the loan funds. I asked them to show me receipts, contracts, vendor invoices. Travis shifted in his seat. Megan told me to stop being difficult. I pressed harder. I asked specifically about the venue contract, the caterer's deposit, the photographer's booking fee. They couldn't produce a single document. Then I opened the folder Dennis had prepared. I showed Megan the investigator's report on Travis, his suspended real estate license, his unemployment, his $48,000 in personal debt. I watched her face as she read each page. Confusion turned to disbelief, then to something darker. Travis jumped to his feet. He told me it was all lies, that someone was trying to sabotage them. But I kept going. I showed Megan the evidence of the renovation scam. 11 elderly victims. Photographs of Travis collecting checks from people older than me. People who trusted him and never saw their money again. Megan turned to Travis. She asked him to tell her it wasn't true. He couldn't. His mouth opened and closed, and nothing came out. Then I played the recordings. Every threat Travis had made in my kitchen. Every cruel word Megan had said at the hospital. And the moment of absolute silence after I played back Megan's voice, saying I had tripped because I was old and clumsy. That silence told me everything I needed to know. But I wasn't finished. I stood up and walked to my desk. I pulled out the brokerage statements showing my investment account. I placed them on the coffee table in front of my daughter. Megan, I said, for the past 18 years, since your mother died, I have maintained an investment account funded by her life insurance. The current balance is $260,000. She stared at the number. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I told her I had always planned to give her that money. I told her I had imagined it as a wedding gift, or a house fund, or a college fund for her future children. But I needed to know first that she deserved it. I needed to know she was the kind of woman Diane would have been proud of. She was not. Megan stood up slowly. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set hard. She asked me if I had lied to her for months just to play some sick game. I told her it wasn't a game. I told her it was a test, and she had failed it in every possible way. Travis made a move toward me. He pointed his finger in my face and told me I was going to regret this. But then, a knock came at the front door. It was Dennis, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers from the Franklin County Sheriff's Department. Sandra had called them the moment Travis showed aggression. The officers informed Travis that a warrant had been issued for his arrest on 11 counts of fraud, 3 counts of elder financial exploitation, and 1 count of conspiracy. They handcuffed him in my living room while Megan screamed at me that I was destroying her life. One of the officers turned to Megan and informed her that a separate warrant existed for her arrest on charges of assault, causing bodily harm to a senior citizen, and 1 count of elder abuse. She went silent. Completely, absolutely silent. They cuffed her and led her out of my house and into a patrol car. I stood in my doorway and watched them drive away. Dorothy came over from her house and stood beside me. She put her frail hand on my arm and told me I had done the right thing, even though it was the hardest thing. Dennis called me that evening. Ashley Holloway had been terminated from the credit union that same afternoon. The compliance investigation confirmed she had illegally accessed the accounts of 12 elderly customers, all connected to Travis's scam network. She was facing federal charges under the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. Janet Holloway called me the next day. She told me I had ruined her family. I told her that her son had been stealing from elderly people for 2 years and that her daughter had committed federal crimes to help him. She hung up on me, and I never heard from her again. The trial took place 4 months later. Travis was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison plus full restitution to all 11 victims. Megan pleaded guilty to assault and elder abuse. The judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison and 3 years of probation, with a permanent restraining order preventing her from contacting me. During her sentencing, Megan was allowed to make a statement. She turned to me in the gallery and said she was sorry. She said she had let Travis convince her that pressuring me was normal, that families were supposed to sacrifice everything for each other. She said she wished she could take it all back. I didn't respond. Some apologies arrive after the damage is permanent. They don't erase anything. They just float in the air like smoke from a fire that already burned the house down. 3 months after the trial, I sat down with Dennis and my financial advisor. I restructured my estate. The $260,000 that I had once planned to give Megan was redirected. I donated $100,000 to the Ohio Coalition Against Elder Abuse. I established a $50,000 scholarship fund at Ohio State, in Diane's name for first-generation college students. I set aside $60,000 for Dorothy's long-term care needs. The remaining $50,000 went into a trust that Megan could access only after completing a certified rehabilitation program for domestic violence offenders and maintaining 5 consecutive years of clean financial and FUTI criminal records. Dennis told me I was being too generous with the trust. I told him I wasn't being generous. I was being a father. The difference between giving your child everything they want and giving them what they need is the difference between love and surrender. I had surrendered for too long. Dorothy passed away peacefully in her sleep the following spring. At her funeral, her granddaughter, a young teacher from Cincinnati, told me that Dorothy had spoken about me constantly in her final months. She said Dorothy called me the proof that good men still existed in this world. I think about Diane every day. I think about the promise I made at her bedside. I told her I would make sure our daughter grew up strong, independent, and kind. 2 out of 3 wasn't enough. But I have learned that a father's job isn't to guarantee outcomes. It's to set boundaries, to model integrity, and to love fiercely enough to let consequences do their work. Megan will be released next year. I don't know if she'll call me. I don't know if I'll answer. But I do know that the $50,000 trust is there, waiting, the same way my love has always been there, quiet and patient and conditional only on one thing, that she becomes the woman her mother believed she could be. Some people will tell you that a parent's love should be unconditional. I used to believe that. But unconditional love without boundaries is just permission. And permission, given to the wrong person at the wrong time, is the most dangerous gift a father can give. If you connected with this story, support us with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my situation? To hear the next story, click the video that's appearing on your screen right now. Thank you for watching.